Okay, good morning. Now, this morning I'm going to go over a few books that I used over the last few sermons, and many of you have requested this, and it's either through emails or letters written to the church. People will say, hey, I see your sources. Do you have sources? Can you give me, I guess, a full works cited or a full bibliography to the last few sermons I printed or that have been put out? And also, people actually send letters and be like, hey, this book is one I have in my hands. Do you have it? What do you think of it? Have you read it? Okay, so that it's all the time this happens, that people want me to read books and go through them with them. Now, it's not my job to read books for you. Okay, but I will read books that you give me. And I do get a lot of requests about this. So if you did send me an email or such that you made a request about a book and you're asking about a book I've read or that you've read, give me some time. I've got a laundry list of books to go through. And I often say, if somebody's job was to come and read the books that I need to read, they'd have 40 hours a week, easily. So we're getting there. We're getting there. Now, whenever I bring up a book up here at the pulpit, that's why we're called By the Book this morning. Whenever I mention a book at the pulpit, don't confuse that with me endorsing the book. Okay, 100%, right? I'm just mentioning material we have. Now, in the church library, I do have 12,258 books currently. That's 3,076,359 pages worth of material right behind me in the library by 6,869 authors. Now, I went through all of those books, and I found I found books that I agree with 100% word for word. This is what I came up with. All right? Of 12,000 books in the back, this one's the one I know is truth, 100% cover to cover, just so you know. So no, just because I have books in my library doesn't mean that I agree with all those books 100%. There's many, many things. As a matter of fact, months ago, we brought up Howard Rand's Primogenesis. Remember that? I think Rand is an outstanding author, but he did get that Ham thing wrong. Remember, Ham turned black and castrated Noah? Remember that? I don't have a problem with Rand, but in this case, in that book, that was a serious error. All right, so it's things like that. So obviously, in my library, there are books of which the majority of the contents I agree with, and others not so much. All right? But I think some are more useful than others. Some books are more dependable than others, and I don't think any of them are dangerous to kingdom believers. Okay, that we have a bunch of books back there. Now, I believe that the kingdom believers are some of the most well-educated and most solid Christians we have in the nation. And like I've said before, most of you don't belong to a church, and you know more than most pastors, right? And I attribute these qualities in kingdom ministers most often and kingdom believers most often to your knowledge of Bible law. That's the thing that sets you guys apart. An understanding of the law and the prophets is really what makes kingdom believers, in my mind, a cut above the rest. Okay? And my job, of course, then, is to continue your education. That's my job, and being well-rounded is superbly beneficial. Okay? And that's well-roundedness is, taking information and going through it. Now, there are some of you that requested I actually conduct formal book reviews, and especially in light of my sermons over the last few weeks. Now, in the academic world, there is a structured review process that's involved when you go through book reviews. And we're going to go over that very quickly this morning, just so you know where I'm coming from. And so from now on, any book that I'm mentioning from the pulpit, I'll let you know. I'll be sure to mention this is a full review, this is a review, or it's just something I might mention I have, or I've read, or I may mention as a source. Okay, so there is a difference, because there's been some confusion, and we'll get to the bottom of this at the end of the sermon. All right, so I'm going to be reviewing a nonfiction book this morning that's actually been requested, that people have asked me if I've read, and what do I think about it. Okay, so it's a nonfiction book, and in the nonfiction book review world, there's 3 questions you should ask yourself before reviewing a book. Okay, do I have the appropriate expertise to review this book? Okay, now very important that you honestly answer this question. Okay, when you're going through a book, Don't confuse expertise, though, with a degree in language arts or a seminary degree in doctrinal theology. It's just, do you have genuine knowledge on the subject? Do you have a relevant knowledge? Can you competently comment on the discipline of this book, okay, before you get started? And this asking yourself this question, when you evaluate a book, any book, is going to clarify your area of expertise anyway, all right? So if I asked you kingdom ministers and kingdom believers, your input on a book, a fictional book titled Not Under the Law, okay, and I say it details how we're no longer governed by the law of Moses or God's moral law. If I asked your input on that, your area of expertise, of course, you'd say, well, of course, Reed, the response I get from you is we're under the law. So I know that book is not going to be something that's going to be very useful to us. However, that's because you have an understanding of these things. You see, so that's how you kind of narrow it down. And you guys understand that the law is valid and we should be seen doing it, right? It'd be difficult to call yourself a Christian otherwise. We understand these things. It's kingdom believers. All right, number 2. Do I have a conflict of interest regarding this book or its author? Now, this is how it's done in the academic world. So when I'm asked to do a book like this, do I have a conflict of interest? Okay, and this is a big issue, especially in the kingdom believer world. It's a big one. Conflicts of interests are anything that might impede your ability to give an unbiased assessment of the book. And we just spoke about this morning. Miss Martha says she knows people that if it's maybe contrary to anything they've ever been taught, the Baptist church, they're not even going to look at it. And that's a confirmation bias. You see, they understand it's a conflict of interest, and they won't even look at it, right? So you're not going to be able to preserve your integrity in the review process if you cannot address the material fairly. Okay, and that's a big problem in the kingdom church because we have books that seem to be written just to throw mud at someone else. Usually their sources are dubious, right? They're sources that I come across that I can't verify and I can't use. And I'm not saying the guy didn't do his homework, but he didn't document. Okay, so I'm not going to use that because it can't be verified. Martha and I run into this quite a little bit. So, and that's what I mean about being well-rounded. Even if the material is something to you that is outrageous, if it's way out in left field, read it and give it a fair shake, then share your thoughts about it, right? Nothing wrong with checking out both sides of an argument. Nothing at all. Even if one or the other or both are extremes. And we'll cover a book like that later on with extremes. Now, so when you have two extreme points of view and you don't really know what's verifiable or not, we'll do an easy one that I come across about contested viewpoints. Okay, and you'll find this a lot in the kingdom as well. But of course, I like to, or I studied dinosaurs quite a little bit. Okay, so we're going to take dinosaurs. It's an easy one. Very easy one. So my favorite paleontologist is Dr. Robert Backer. Okay, and he says that dinosaurs were warm-blooded and that the T-Rex was a hunter, and instead of extinction, they turned into birds. Okay, that's what Dr. Robert Backer says. And I've read 2 of his books, one of which was Raptor Red, which is a really good one. It's about the Utah raptor and its lifestyle. It was actually an excellent book. I read that in 6th grade. And then you've got Dr. Jack Horner on the other side of things. And he says that the dinosaurs cared for their young after finding nests with eggs in them in North America. And he says that T-Rex was a scavenger. And he has several theories concerning their demise as well. But now I've read both sides of these doctors, and I can see validity from both sides. Okay? Now I do favor Robert Backer, but I read the other arguments. And however, I'm not an archaeologist or paleontologist. So do I have the expertise to comment really on this subject? No, I've studied a little bit. But I can't say with certainty who's correct. I suppose somewhere in the middle is the truth. Okay? And that's all I can do. You'll find this a lot in religious studies. You've got these 2 extremes. And so I say, well, T-Rex is maybe he's half hunter and half scavenger. So I choose the middle. I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. I still think T-Rex is pretty cool, right? Now, a bias would be, if I'm such a fan of Bakker and his theory of T-Rex, that I would absolutely refuse to hear anyone else out on the subject, right? And if it seemed to me that it would cause doubt or upend a favorite theory I have about him. Now, you see, confirmation, having a confirmation bias is unfair because to any alternative information presented, because I would not be able to inspect it with a balanced, neutral, or impartial attitude. And that's very important. This is what keeps things honest in the academic world. This is important. And I think kingdom ministers could learn from this if you want to pen a book or you have penned a book, okay? Because it's a problem. And your attitude is the main factor in the conflict of interest process, really, when you get down to it, because it compromises your judgment, okay? So give it a fair shake. And there's plenty of ministries around here that I don't agree with their doctrines. But I've read their books. I've seen their viewpoints. I give them a fair shake. Okay? And it's important. Question 3. Do I have the time to conduct this effectively? So don't put yourself on a deadline or a schedule. Take your time. This ties it all together. You'll not be fair and balanced if you rush. And I just said I've got books on my desk. I'm going through them. I'll let you know what I think. But I'm going to take my time. Sometimes you may have to make notes as you go along. Or you may have to conduct a second detailed reading. Nothing wrong with that either. Some subjects are heavy ones. And you may have to read supplementary material as well as the book to get a broad idea or broad impression of it. No rush. Fine. This is all part of the process to be scholarly and academic. All right, so we've decided a formal review is a reality. Now what? Let's look at what we would actually be looking at the book. Okay? So far, when I'm asked to do a book, I'm going to ask these questions about the book and maybe its author. Does this book have a contribution to the discipline, okay? And what is the discipline? What the book's about, okay? Does it make a contribution for the discipline? Is it clear and to the point for the target reader? It's another thing we were talking this morning. Would it be useful for teaching? Would I recommend it to students? And is the subject matter an area that expands, or is it static? Okay, and that's a big issue. Remember how we said, well, now the Qumran scrolls have helped expand our understanding of the Old Testament. So we're not done with textual criticism because more and more things come to light. New things, right? So yes, this would be an area of expansion. So there are times when the author may be incorrect, but it's not that he's so much incorrect as he's just outdated. Okay, so that's all right. All right, number 2, what I check for on a book, academic rigor and accuracy. This is the big one. This is a large part of the honesty and integrity portion of both you and the author's behalf. Is the author's methodology correct? Is it academically sound? Is the argument, if any, proposed in a sound or convincing way? Okay? Is the appropriate research mentioned, able to be referenced? Okay, that's all above the table, honest. Is the information presented accurate and correct? Okay? Is the information clear and well organized? Okay? That's the thing we're looking for. Now this is very important. A review, a formal scholarly review, is to be done on the book's presented information or discipline. Okay? That's what we're talking about. It is not, a review of a book is not a way to attack the author's character or defame them. That's a big problem. However, personally, I am against errors of fact. I'm against illogical or improper statements, shoddy research, and indefensible extremisms. Okay? Those are the things I'm against. And these things do indeed work to discredit the author and their position scholastically. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. Now, if I present a book from either camp on an issue, it's not because I'm defending one or the other. I'm illustrating error regardless of where it appears. Okay? And because no one should make false statements or propagate false doctrine. I don't care who it comes from. So if I comment on the fact that John Hagee is propagating false doctrine, I'm against the false doctrine. Okay? And I say anyone else does this, I'm against error of fact. I'm not defending him, or am I attacking him? See, this is an error. So, no one should be caught making false statements. Pastors, teachers, kingdom believers, students. That's number 9, of course, commandment 9, false witness, lying. All right, so I'm against that. All right, so these are how book reviews are done professionally in the academic, scholarly world, nonfiction, okay? And let's go into a book or two. First book up. Here we go. All right, anybody heard of this book? You've seen this one before? Okay. This is New Age Bible Versions by G.A. Ripplinger, copyright 1993. Some people actually asked about this book and want me to say what I thought about it. So here we go. Using the guidelines I just gave you, we're going to go this way. This is why. Now you'll notice right off the bat down here, that says the author's name is presented on the spine here as G.A. Ripplinger. G.A. Ripplinger. Now listen to this. In a Pentecostal paper titled The End Times and Victorious Living from February of 1994, she says, each discovery was not a result of effort on my part, but the direct hand of God. So much so that I hesitated even to put my name on the book. I used G.A. Ripplinger, which signifies to me God and Ripplinger. God is the author and Ripplinger as secretary. End quote. Now, in making this comment, Ms. Ripplinger has committed a logical fallacy right off the bat, commonly employed by authors of religious works, even in the kingdom ministry. Now listen, she's claiming some sort of divine inspiration so that her position now is infallible. Okay? And that's an appeal to higher authority is what that's called, and it's a fallacy. Now, we kingdom believers know about the law of 2 witnesses, okay? So we know how to go and find the fake. How do we find the fake? Well, we take what she says and we weigh it against the law and the prophets, don't we? Right. Not to mention now that she said that this is God writing this, right? Now, any errors that I find in this book, I'm faced with the fact that I have to affirm that those are errors committed by God since He wrote it, right? And there are errors throughout this work, let me assure you. And personally, I'm not willing to ascribe those errors to God. But when you say, God wrote this book, not me, any error in this book is God's error. And you're going to make God look like a fool and a goofball. All right, so let's go along. Keep that in mind. This is not her doing it. God wrote it. She was just the secretary. All right. Now, the cover of the book says, an exhaustive documentation exposing the message, men, and manuscripts moving mankind to the Antichrist's one world religion. The new case against the NIV, NASB, NKJV, NRSV, NAB, REB, RSV, CEV, TEV, GNB, Living, Phillips, New Jerusalem, and New Central Bible translations. The latest research supporting the authorized King James Version. Okay, so she's against these New Age translations, and she's supporting the King James. Let me remind you. Okay, she's supporting this one, and the rest of these are New Age Bible translations, which according to her are moving mankind to Antichrist's one world religion. So it's these moving along the one world religion of Babylon, not this one. Okay, so you see the problem already. All right, okay. All right, so that should tell you something about the contribution to the discipline then, right off the bat. As a King James Version onlyist, she's attempting to hold the King James Version above the others when in fact it's copied from the same manuscript as the New Age ones. So she's made a case against the King James, or a case against these other ones. We can immediately see with just this slide a contradiction. Okay? We're already starting off on the wrong foot. All right? Now, this book is marred by so much error and faulty logic that it cannot be used as a reliable resource, let me assure you. I don't have all day to talk about that, so we're going to go over a few points about it very quickly. Now, this, actually, Kent Hovind creation scientist, young earth theorist. You know this guy, right? He says, in this video, he says that this book changed his life and his philosophy. He was only King James only to begin with, and now he knows why. So that's one endorsement you'll get about this book, and there's Gail Riplinger there, and that's Ken Hovind, the creation scientist and young earth theorist. He did Dinosaur Adventureland, remember? Right? Okay. Anyway, this is not a dependable resource for an enormous amount of reasons. I'm just going to list a few. For one, it's rife with misquoting and poor documentation. Although its referencing appears to be exhaustive, it's not reliable. I won't go through what I actually checked for time, but here's what I found in a nutshell, okay? She misquotes a great many people in books. She goes so far as to remove quotes from their context. It's a big problem. She misquotes sources and then claims those to be direct quotes. And she also puts words in people's mouths throughout this entire book. Now, when I locate and identify errors of this sort, please understand that when she misquotes somebody or misuses a quote from somebody, I'm not defending or citing the man with the quote. I'm not doing that. I'm saying that it's wrong to misquote people and have them say something they did not say. That's part and parcel to slander. I don't care who's saying it. So if I say, well, she misquoted John Hagee, well, I'm not defending John Hagee. You're not supposed to be misquoting people, right? Now, taking remarks out of their proper context, she does this, and then she makes erroneous connections that help her prove her point and move it along. So she takes misquoted quotations out of context, then makes an erroneous connection between the two to make it all work for her. Okay, it's an imaginary argument she has. She has faulty logic, a lot of faulty logic, and it's advanced throughout this whole book. Sometimes she makes improper connections using unequal or unfair comparisons. For example, I'm going to read page 90 and 91. Here's some faulty logic. NIV chief editor Edwin Paulman also flatly denies free will and as own admission accepts the most illogical matters possible. Okay, now what she's saying is the NIV chief editor Edwin Paulman flat out denies free will. Okay, to flat out deny free will is a major tenet of Calvinism. Okay, Calvinism. Tulip? Right? Okay. So, if God judges men by their actions, they must be free to act. Palmer's conclusions are truly illogical. His denial of free will is seen in his NIV translation. He says that the change in 1 Thessalonians 1:4 suggests the opposite of the KJV. Then she goes on and she says, like Manson, Blavatsky, and NIV's chief Edwin Paulman, who see God as the one, both driving evil and good, they are actually calling evil good, according to Isaiah 5:20. They are setting the stage for the slaughter of those who are to be saved during the tribulation. Okay, so she says, so what she's saying is, she's made a connection between Calvinism and the likes of Charles Manson and Blavatsky, right? Blavatsky, right? Everybody knows Blavatsky. Okay, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, theosophist, esoteric, and mystic. Okay, Blavatsky's theosophical ideas are a form of occultism. She subscribed to anti-Christian thought within Western esotericism, which emphasized the idea of ancient universal occult science that should be revived. She stated that the teachings were passed on to her by adepts who lived in various parts of the world. Okay, this is the lady that is pretty much the brand name of theosophy, right? Theosophy. Are you familiar with Annie Besant? Okay, anyway. Wisdom above all, there is no religion higher than truth. And you can see she's employed a bunch of occult symbols in that. This is the lady. She's the one that started the whole deal. So, we actually have her books. Okay, I have The Secret Doctrine and ISIS Unveiled. Not that ISIS, the other one. Not the terrorist, the Egyptian goddess. Okay, so you got ISIS and The Secret Doctrines. Okay, these are theosophical works. Matter of fact, there was supposedly a copy on Hitler's nightstand. Okay, anyway. I have them. This is the Theosophical Works. These are the books. These are actually part one of two. So there's 4 of these. Each one of these is 2 parts. We have them in my library. So what she's done, now, while Calvinism has its problems, okay, there is certainly no connection between Calvinists and modern esoterics, okay? As a matter of fact, Charles Spurgeon, familiar with that guy? Okay, I have a few of his books. Okay, just a few. We have quite a few in the library. This is Spurgeon at his best and Spurgeon, Prince of Preachers. Okay, so Spurgeon, he's a famous Calvinist. And if you read his books, you'll find out that he in no way sets the stage for New Age occultism. You see what I'm saying? He in no way does that. And I guess Ripplinger forgot to mention that more than a few of the King James Version translators were indeed Calvinists. Okay, but she says that if you have Calvinist ideas, you may as well be Charles Manson or study esoterics and theosophy. That's an erroneous connection. Okay, you can't do that, and it's not honest. All right, so go back to this. On page 115, now this is an amazing things you'll read in this book. And I hope that the person that asked me to do this isn't, anyway, I hope they didn't take this book too seriously. But I'm going to give it a fair shake first. All right, on page 115, the accompanying chart, and she's going to show a chart, all right? Show how lights and visions moved from one, Mystery Babylon, lights and visions, from Mystery Babylon to Greek philosophy, Plato, and a few Greek New Testament manuscripts to the revival of Mystery Babylon by New Age and apostate Christianity. Okay, so she's going to draw a connection from this lights and visions, and she's going to connect these things from Mystery Babylon all the way down. And okay, so she's saying Mystery Babylon, and she'll go through these writings. Mystery Babylon, there is seen on the wall the temple a mass of light, which appears at first to be from a great distance. It is transformed while unfolding itself into a visage, evidently divine and supernatural. Mystery Babylon, okay? Egypt says, strange and amazing objects presented themselves. Sometimes it appeared bright and resplendent with life, according to the customs of Egypt. Now she's drawing a connection, light and visions. In Greece, Plato says, being initiated in these mysteries is a consequence of the divine initiator. We become spectators of entire, simple, immovable, and blessed visions resident in light. Light again. The New Greek editor, the New Age, the very highest attainment possible on this earth is to take the 9th initiation of the one initiator, sometimes called the Lord of this world, Sanat, the ever virgin, according to Jeffrey Hodson in New Age religions, okay? Now, all that is now leading up to this, the NASB translation of Acts 22. A very bright light suddenly flashed from heaven, but I did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. I could not see because of the brightness of the light. Now, you understand that's a story of Saul of Tarsus, right? There it is. So, to produce this soliloquy, Acts 22, in the NASB required the gross mistranslations of 5 areas of the text for their pension of bright and brightness, paralleling those comments by initiates, virgin viewers, has no basis in any Greek text. So she's saying that the NASB, when it translated Acts 22, it didn't do it from a real source. It got it from the New Age ideas that go all the way back to Mystery Babylon herself. Hollywood is preparing patrons not to be afraid of these bright lights with movies such as Close Encounters. That's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Movies like E.T. desensitize viewers to the ugly, horrible, ugly creature described by Mirjana Drasicevic, and it seems Sylvania, the light company, and Satan can produce bright lights, but the glory of God is beyond anything special effects artists can produce using 500-watt elliptical reflectors or Fresnel lenses. So this amazing connection between the NASB and the bright lights of Mystery Babylon is propagated by the New Age religions and Hollywood movies such as E.T. Okay. And the horribly ugly creature, Mirjana Drasicevic. Now, do you understand who she is? Okay, she was a woman who supposedly had a little conversation with Satan himself. She describes, as she's praying to the Virgin Mary, she has a vision of the devil actually coming down and talking to her, and she describes him as ugly, horribly ugly. That's the quote she's getting from this Mirjana lady. Interestingly enough, if you go through the whole interview with the lady that had the conversation with Satan, just like any James Bond bad guy, the Satan of this story gives his whole plan out to the good guys, right? Just to be thwarted. Just to be thwarted. That's why you never heard anything come out of that vision, because she was warned by him first. Then he gives her whole evil mad scientist plan. She, of course, is able to curtail his plans and eventually foil them. And of course, what a blunder to give the plan out to a virgin praying to Mary. Anyway, it gets, am I qualified to say that's ridiculous? Okay, that's ridiculous. All right, speaking to the actual devil, ugly, horribly. If you're going to have visions of the devil, if you've watched E.T. or Close Encounters, you're not going to see the devil coming because you've been desensitized by ugly creatures. Okay, all right. Now, that faulty logic. Faulty logic. I hope we can call that, correct? Okay. So I really don't know what to say about that amazing connection she's made between Mystery Babylon and the NASB version of Acts 22. But she connects New Age doctrines with the New Age doctrines being pushed by Acts 22 are New Age doctrines that connects lights and this Sanat, the ever virgin, okay? Now, keep in mind that according to the book, according to this author of this book, this is a God-inspired composition containing the newest research supporting the King James Version. Keep that in mind, all right? Now, one last faulty logic example, and you guys are going to love this. All right, she uses, and this actually pops up in the Kingdom Ministry quite a little bit, so don't laugh too hard when you see it. Page 149, she uses acrostic algebra to prove that the New Age Bible versions, which are anything but King James, mind you, New Age Bible versions are anything but King James, are wolves in sheep's clothing, and using math, she can prove, using math, that the other translations of modern English are sins. Okay, we're going to go through. You guys took Algebra 1, Algebra 2? All right, here's her acrostic algebra. Now, God gave her this math too. She said that. So using acrostic algebra, she's going to show that other New Age versions, other than the authorized version, equal sin. Let's solve for x. Okay, now notice, NASV, she had to turn, what she had to do, she had to change NASV from NASB. Okay, so she had to move that B out because otherwise, X, if you solve it that way, X is SBI. Okay, so I did the math for you. So NASV, and of course here replaced within, what was that, FOIL? First, outside, inside, last. Remember? Yeah. Remember that? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Yeah. Coming back to you now? All right, solve for X. Anyway, you cancel, bring this over. This, because you're on this side of the equals, it's going to turn it to a plus and not a minus. Right, Algebra 2, pop. Sin is X. Acrostic algebra says when you use New Age versions outside of the AAV, now this is logical. This is an equation. Using anything other than the AAV equates to sin. Using the algebra God gave her. Now I'll say this now. When you use logic like this, you can prove anything about anything, okay? And that's just word games. Now, you'll see this a lot, actually. You'll see acrostics in sacred namers. They'll do that a lot with the acrostics. I'm like, well, look, this algebra God gave me tells me that this is the one. And then somebody else came up with another one, but then they have to change something. Of course we're confused. And then people are confused. Of course they are. So anyway, word games. And I'm fairly good at these, so let's do another one. All right, let's do a word game with this one. It's going to be Pastor Reed's math. Let's move some letters around and, cross things out and stuff. So I see cruel. I see flyer. I see rifle. I see relic. Get me on Wheel of Fortune, right? So, all right, so according to Pastor Reed then, what we just did with my acrostics, Lucifer is no longer a man or a king in Isaiah. Okay, Lucifer is now someone who is cruel, flying around with a relic rifle. All right. See, I just proved that using acrostics. It's no longer the devil. It's no longer an Assyrian king. It's a cruel man with an old rifle who flies around. All right, so be on the lookout. But remember now, if you've seen E.T., you're not going to see him coming. You've been desensitized. All right, so I can choose to prove anything using word games, to prove any statement, okay? Now, I intended this illustration as a joke. In the book, she's serious about the acrostics. And like I said, I would remind you she had to move that B out of there. Otherwise, X is equal to SBI. And the thing is, if you are wondering, well, Reed, we solved for X, but what is X? You see, I never got to what X is. Well, X is what we solved for, the brand of the hand of the wolf's skin. So if you go back to your algebraic equation or our algebraic expression, we're solving for the brand of the hand of the wolf's skin, which after you do the equation, the expression is sin is equal to the brand of the hand of the wolf's skin. You've been warned. All right. Now, another thing is errors of fact. Okay, errors of fact. There's a huge amount of factual errors throughout this book, and here's one. This one's the one that affects us. Okay, this is why it even got mentioned, to be honest. Okay, errors of fact, page 537. Now, she's going through the Septuagint, and we're going to go over a little bit of this next week about how people across the nation, pastors or otherwise, really badmouth the Septuagint. They really, really do. So she's trying to get rid of the Septuagint because it's a pesky document. If you're King James only, I understand. I understand that. It's very, very troublesome. The Septuagint, or LXX, a Greek translation of the Old Testament, is used today by textual critics in many instances to determine the wording of new versions. It appears that Origen was the author of this AD document. All right. So she's saying that Origen of Alexandria, a Christian scholar who lived from 185 to 254 AD, okay? That's after Christ, right? So Origen was the author of this AD document. The NIV translators admit they used the Old Testament text, which was standardized early in the 3rd century by Origen. All of the LXX manuscripts cited in its concordance, the LXX, were written after AD 200. All right, so she's got, according to Ripplinger, the Greek Septuagint was copied by Origen in the time after Christ. Okay, and also keep in mind now, this work is to defend the King James. But she's saying Origen was the guy that penned or invented the Septuagint in AD 200, 3rd century. All right. Now, let's see what the King James translators themselves have to say. I have the 1611. This is a facsimile reproduction of the 1611 King James. All right, and I'm going to read the translator's note here, and it actually says it's very small, but I've got it up on the screen. Translator's note to the readers. And we're going to read this. I'm going to see what they have to say about this. There we go. All right. But when the fullness of time drew near, that the Son of Righteousness, the Son of God, should come into the world, whom God ordained to be reconciliation through faith in his blood, not of the Jew only, but also of the Greeks, yea, all of them that were scattered abroad, then lo, it pleased the Lord to stir up the spirit of a Greek prince, Greek for descent and language, even Ptolemy, Philadelph, king of Egypt, to procure the translating of the book of God out of Hebrew into Greek. This translation of the 70 interpreters, commonly so called, which prepared the way for our Savior among the Gentiles by written preaching, as St. John the Baptist did among the Jews by vocal. Now, what does that just say? Now, this is in the facsimile reproduction. And if you want to know how to read Old English like that, we'll get to it, because that's not easy to do. Anyway, according to that note, it says, Ptolemy Philadelph, king of Egypt. So during this guy's reign, the translating of the Bible out of Hebrew into Greek, and it's called the 70. This is from the 1611 King James. Ptolemy Philadelphia, you remember this guy? King of Egypt. He's the one that kicked off the LXX translation, remember? We saw him on a sermon 7 January, titled, What's the Word? Okay? So this translator's note found in my facsimile reproduction of 1611, they say that God's word was translated out of the Hebrew into the Greek during the reign of this guy, who was on the throne from 284 to 246 BC, before Christ. Now, for previous sermons, we know that the LXX, when it's dated, it dates back to 250 BC. Well, that falls right in between these, doesn't it? All right, so after checking this out, both you and I know, as a matter of fact, that Origen did not invent or author the Septuagint. It is not an AD document. According to who? Pastor Reed? No. According to the translators of the 1611 themselves, according to the history books, and according to the preface in this Septuagint. It's common knowledge this is the guy. Gail Ripplinger says, no, it's an imaginary document penned by this man in AD 200. That's error of fact. That's error of fact. I told you that Septuagint is not popular with King James Version onlyists. It is not. They'll go so far as to misquote history. Error of fact. So that's just a few things wrong with this book. And there's no reason I found to promote it. None. Now don't misunderstand me. Just because I say that this book is fraught with inaccuracies, do not confuse it with me supporting or promoting other versions of the text over the King James either. No translation is perfect, and many modern English translations contain errors and corruptions as well. This review should be taken as just this. A review. Don't make anything more out of it. It's not an attack on Ripplinger or the King James, nor is it a defense of either. It's just a warning. Be careful. This book is not dependable. Its resources are dubious. Its writings are spurious, and it's full of errors. It's full of errors. Don't be caught quoting this book. Now, all in all, do I consider this book to be dangerous? No. It's nothing more than undependable. That's all. Now, all of this, like I said earlier, was kicked off by requests given to me via email or written letters and correspondence. However, I will bring to light another issue that's arisen from a particular comment left on YouTube by a viewer under last week's sermon video posted on, that was 11 February of this year. So before I cite this, I would like to remind you that this is not a personal attack or defamation of character. Public comments in public forums, discords, chats, or threads are not copyrighted and do not fall under public domain. Okay, so everybody be like, hey, it's a public comment on YouTube. What is that? It's not public domain, because public domain says that it was once copyrighted and it's no longer copyrighted. So if anything, public comments on YouTube fall under fair use. Okay, that's fair use. And as such, as fair use, they can be cited. And actually, the APA gives you guidelines on how to cite YouTube comments, that you would cite them much like a blog. Okay, so just so you know. Now, I do respect screen names and pseudonyms. Okay, so when someone leaves a comment and I know that that's the pseudonym, I'm not going to tell you who that is really. That's a breach of etiquette and privacy. You don't do that. But I'm not going to name anyone personally. But just so you know, it's a comment underneath the video. Anybody can see it, anybody can read it. That's fine. So of course I'm going to comment on it. This wasn't a matter of personal correspondence or private messaging. Okay? Now, I don't want to discourage anyone's thoughts. I don't want to discourage you communicating your thoughts in the comment section of YouTube videos, okay? Such things, I'm not going to discourage that, because those actually destroy the very fabric of what is known online as the phenomenon of shared reality, okay? And anyway, that's, if you don't know what shared reality is, that's just part of being well-rounded and up to date, or in the loop, if you read Reddit. Okay, now, I would never disclose any personal correspondence from anyone, private messages or otherwise, without the express permission of the other party. But this is a public comment, so it's public. Instead of formally citing, I'm just going to read a portion of this comment's pertinent bits, okay? It says, and I quote, this comment from YouTube of last week's video, "Be very careful recommending Bart Ehrman's books. A disclaimer needs to be added that some may not realize he is an enemy of Christ and one of the leading atheists of our day. He also has a lot of leaven in his books and enjoys destroying Christians' faith in the Bible." This comment was highlighted, and as of today, it was given 7 thumbs up. Okay, so I'm talking to at least 8 people now, unless you thumbed up your own comment, unless you liked your own comment. Now, last week, I put up this slide. Recall? Okay. Interesting, no one said anything about this book or this man here. Not a word. But Bart Ehrman, it's got to go. But not this one. All right, now, either they didn't say anything about this either because they've never heard of Bruce Metzger or never bothered to read his books or anything like that. Now, Metzger was a very influential scholar in the New Testament textual criticisms, okay? Actually, he's somewhat of a giant in that field of study, Metzger, so it's very unlikely you haven't heard of this man. He's also on the committee behind the RSV translation. Metzger was. And if you recall last week, the RSV we had a problem with. It's the one that changed Junia the female to Junius the man, and then went ahead and changed it, men of note among the apostles. Okay, so Metzger was on that committee behind the RSV translation, okay? And but no comments about him. None. And I showed this at the very same sermon this comment was found on. And Metzger, interestingly, was also Ehrman was also Ehrman's academic mentor. And Ehrman himself has many fond things to say about Bruce Metzger. So it's odd that people would say nothing about Metzger and revile Ehrman when the two of them have nearly the same conclusions and they shared a close academic friendship. Now, Metzger came under fire from many evangelicals for saying that a few books of the Bible, especially the Gospels, were the result of composites from several sources. Okay, and I've studied that myself, and it seems to be that way. They're composites. But reading either book is therefore not a dangerous exercise. It's just a well-rounded study. And Pastor Reed believes you're able to handle that, Kingdom believers out there. So no disclaimer needed. None. I don't think you guys are fools or easily fooled. I do expect you to conduct prayerful studies and don't leave your homework undone. That's what I expect. As far as him being a leading atheist, remember this book? This is the one that caused the invited ire. As far as the comment said, Bart Ehrman is a leading atheist. Well, I don't know. That's only half true. Okay, according to an NPR broadcast titled Fresh Air, which was put out in March 31st of 2020 at 1:25 p.m. Eastern Time. Mr. Ehrman says that he considers himself both an atheist and agnostic. Okay? Now, I don't know what's meant by the term leading, but if it's in terms of popularity or finances, well, Bill Gates takes the cake. Okay, and I actually use Windows operating systems, and obviously I don't support Microsoft, but I utilize Windows, and I still maintain that I'm a Christian. Okay, so yes, I'm using atheist software. As a matter of fact, these slides were generated using Microsoft Office PowerPoint by Bill Gates, the professing agnostic. Okay, we're still Christians. All right, and I'm sure there's plenty of books in my library that were penned by either agnostics or atheists. Okay. Now I know I've read a few books that were penned by atheists. Ernest Hemingway, I've read 2 of his novels. He's a professing atheist. The Old Man and the Sea, excellent book. And For Whom the Bell Tolls. I was a little bummed to find out that George Clooney's an atheist. I thought he did a pretty good Batman. Or Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne is Batman. Okay? But anyway, if I were to address the leaven in the book, so leading atheist, I don't know what that means. He's a professed atheist and agnostic. Leading, I don't know. Professionally, financially, the most popular atheist ever, I don't know, I can name a few. Bill Gates is one. So that's okay. Address leaven in the books. So the problem with this book is when you're addressing it as having something that has the leaven of the Pharisees in it, first of all, this guy is not coming at you as a professing Christian. He's also not penning this book with the mind that he's going to have Christians read it and it's going to be Christian instruction. Okay, and what we call that is this book is not considered by Ehrman pastoral theology. It's not considered Christian practical theology. You understand me? This man is not coming from a Christian standpoint writing to Christians. So that's not leaven. He's just not biased, I guess. Now, leaven, I do have a problem with leaven in books. I really do. But that's because it comes to from people who profess to be Christians and mislead our people. I'm holding in my hands John Hagee's #1 bestseller. And of course, anything by Joyce Meyer has got a little bit of leaven in it. And that's putting it mildly. Now what's the difference? Well, now John Hagee runs a major church. He says he's Christian, and he says he's going to tell you things that's good for you. Because you're a Christian just like him. Same with Joyce Meyer. Right? So yeah, that's leaven. Someone who claims not to be a Christian putting out a non-Christian book, it's not leaven. It's not. He's not lying to us, is he? No. John Hagee's books are a little more dangerous, in my humble opinion, because he's coming at us from a pastor's pulpit authority point of view and lying to us about what God's word says. That's leaven. I've got a problem with that. All right. So, but this book isn't written, like I said, as a Christian devotional. It doesn't claim to be practical theology. I suppose people only recognize it because it's a New York Times bestseller. Like I said, nobody said anything about Metzger's work or the other one that reads like a test book. This one was the only one brought up, I suppose, because it's the famous one. But anyway, the author of this book is atheist and agnostic. But I'm going to read you a quote that was given by him, a few quotes by this guy that was on NPR. Now listen up. Listen up. Do your homework. I welcome comments. Leading atheist, enemy to Christ, enjoys hurting Christians. Let's see what he says. Why is he an atheist? Agnostic. Anybody bother to check up on that? I'll help you out. So this is an interview conducted from NPR. So you've got the host, and you've got Bart Ehrman himself giving the responses. Okay, I'm going to read a few things. This will surprise you, so buckle up. So, the host, so what do you believe about death now, about what happens when you die? Ehrman says, well, I've read a lot about death and thought about death in the afterlife for many, many years, and what the philosophers say and the theologians say, and generally what people say, and I think Socrates is probably the one who got it right. He said it would be like a deep sleep. Everybody loves a dreamless sleep. Nobody frets about it or gets upset about having it, and so that's what I think. It's either a deep sleep or a good outcome, and either way it's going to be fine, and that's exactly what I think. Okay. One of the theses, now what he's doing is, this is a 41-minute long broadcast, okay? And it's interviewing Mr. Ehrman about his 2020 book, Heaven and Hell, the history of heaven and hell. So this is the subject matter of this NPR broadcast. Okay, here's another question. One of the theses of your book about the history of heaven and how its views of heaven and hell don't go back to the earliest stages of Christianity, and they're not in the Old Testament or in Jesus' teachings. He said, I know, exactly. That's a big surprise in this book. And the one thing people probably wouldn't expect, because, when I was growing up, I just assumed that this was the view of Christianity. So this must be what Jesus taught. This is what the Old Testament taught. And in fact, it's not right. Our view that when you die, your soul goes to heaven or hell is not found anywhere in the Old Testament, and it's not what Jesus preached. Leading atheist. This is this man. I have to show that in my book. I lay it out and explain why it's absolutely not the case that Jesus believed you died and your soul went to heaven or hell. Jesus had a completely different understanding that people today don't have. Are there things in the Hebrew Bible that still support the idea of heaven and hell as people have come to understand it? Things that you can extract from the Old Testament that might not literally mention heaven and hell, but still support a version of it that emerged? Ehrman says, I think one of the hardest things for people to get their minds around is that the ancient Israelites, and then Jesus himself and his followers, have a very different understanding of what the relationship between what we call body and soul. Our view is that we have got two things going on in the human parts. So you have your body, your physical being, and you have your soul, the invisible part of you that lives on after death, that you can separate the two and they can exist. The soul can exist outside the body. This is not a view that was held by the ancient Israelites, and it's not ever taught in the Old Testament. Okay. The host goes on. Are there specific passages in the Hebrew Bible that support a notion of an afterlife? Yes and no. It's a good question. People generally point to these passages in the book of Psalms that talk about Sheol. It's a word that gets mistranslated in English. Sometimes Sheol is translated to the word hell. If you actually look at what the Psalms say about Sheol, they always equate it to the grave or the pit. And so it actually appears ancient Israelites simply thought that when you died, your body got buried and put in a grave someplace, and that's the place where your remains are. Professing atheists, don't mention them at the pulpit. Host, you say that for the ancient Jews, now remember last week we read out of this book that he does have a problem. He thinks the Jewish people are indeed the chosen people and Jesus was Jewish. So let's go on with that. This is what he says. The host asks, and you say that for the ancient Jews, the fact that the Messiah didn't come, there was a turning point in beliefs that happens right after death. There started to be a belief that reward and punishment would be right after death, as opposed to after the Messiah comes. Okay, so that's what he's saying. Yeah, he says, that became a view somewhat in Judaism, and it became very pronounced view in Christianity. Jesus' main teaching is that the kingdom of God is coming. People today, when they read the phrase kingdom of God, they think he's talking about heaven, the place where your soul goes when you die. But Jesus isn't talking about heaven. He doesn't believe in the separation of soul and body. He doesn't think the soul is going to live on in heaven. Jesus says there's going to be a resurrection of the dead at the end of the time. God will destroy the forces of evil. He will raise the dead, and those who have been on God's side will enter the new kingdom here on earth. They'll be physical, they'll be in bodies, and they will live here on earth, and that is where paradise will be. And so Jesus taught the kingdom of God, a new physical place, was coming soon. Now that's amazing things coming from the mouth of a professing atheist and agnostic. Now I have to ask, this comment left, why did this man become an atheist and agnostic? I read from himself, his blog. The reason Bart Ehrman became an atheist and agnostic is because he could not, for 15 years, and he went to Duke University and Princeton, he was active in the church, but he could not swallow down the burning hell doctrine. And he was done with Christianity and he left it. He could not believe in a God that would torture people forever. Then he put a book out on it. The interview about the book, have you guys heard those doctrines before about the dead or asleep? Sheol is the grave or the pit. There's a physical kingdom of God coming on earth, and we'll have physical bodies resurrected after he comes. That close. I'm told not to mention him. Someone should call this guy and tell him he's that close to the genuine truth. Don't write him off as a leading atheist. This is an opportunity, and a good one at that. Why would I say this? Well, he's an enemy to Christians and evangelicals because he's stating things contrary to their pet doctrines. Right? In the tradition of men, most of which are the state of the dead. And that's a big issue. So much of an issue that's been taught wrong, it's chased him right out of the church. And you've heard this story before. I know you have, from professing kingdom believers now, but like, I almost was done with Christianity. I couldn't believe in a God that would burn people forever. Sheldon Emery did an entire sermon series on this. One of the biggest tenets of there are Baal disciples in America, he said, before we condemn Bart Ehrman, now I'm going to modify what he said. Before we condemn Bart Ehrman, who taught him there's an everlasting burning hell? Who chased this man out of the church with those doctrines? Right? Now, I'm not saying if there's a reason to be agnostic, this is a good one. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, we got a problem. And this man, what I just read, that's an opportunity. Seems this man might even be teachable. And that's a big deal in the kingdom. Teachable people. As a matter of fact, I say it all the time. It's almost easier to talk to atheists and agnostics about things than it is someone who's had 60 years of the Baptist church embedded in their heads. This guy is that close. The state of the dead is one of the biggest doctrines that you almost have to turn around first. And people refuse because they want to know grandma's up in heaven smiling down on us, watching us continually sin every day. Right? Grandma, bring a tear to her eye. I'm glad she's asleep. She knows not anything, right? Bart Ehrman says, well, the ancient Israelites believe that too. Okay. Now, I'd like to read you a testimonial that was sent to me earlier this week. This is from a recently new kingdom believer, actually. I'm not going to disclose. This is personal correspondence, but I did ask the permission to read this. Dear Pastor Reed, I watched many of your videos posted on YouTube from America's Promise with your teachings, as well as teachings from your wife Margaret, Pastor Barley, and Martha Barley. I found these to be very beneficial as they provide clarity about what the Bible does and doesn't say, about the historical context at the time of much of the Bible was written, and how all this applies to my growth as a Christian Israelite today. I also enjoy when you reference many other works as additional witnesses, whether you point to the works of Sheldon Emery, E. Raymond Capt, or C.R. Dickey, or when you reference non-kingdom sources, such as Tim Mahoney, George Lucas, or even the recently referenced Bart Ehrman. It's clear to me that when I pay attention to your references, that you aren't encouraging us to seek worldly sources, but instead show how even these sources support the truth of the Bible as only chosen Israel can understand it. I noticed, however, after your most recent sermon, that there was a comment cautioning you to be wary of using the works of Bart Ehrman because he's an atheist and he could lead people astray. So I wasn't the only one that saw this comment. First off, let me state that I don't totally disagree with the comment, but I don't completely agree with it either. If Ehrman's work can provide a second witness to support the kingdom message of the Bible, then there's value in referencing his work for that purpose, regardless of Ehrman's beliefs. This guy's spot on. Now I'm not sure if the commenter was suggesting you provide a disclaimer before referencing the works of Ehrman or others like him. If you did, I'm sure you could simply state that Bart Ehrman, in his own words, claims to be a Christian agnostic atheist, which I told you guys that, which only indicates that he's both certain of what he doesn't believe and confused about what he does believe. Ehrman himself clarified his statement by saying that he's a Christian and that he does try to hold to the moral values taught in the Christian Bible, but he's agnostic because he doesn't know if there's really a creator God, and he's an atheist, and that he absolutely does not believe in the God taught by the modern Judeo-Christian churches. That's a very interesting distinction, don't you think? I'm actually somewhat familiar with Ehrman from years ago when I had a TikTok account, and a video popped up in my feed from an atheist, in which the video's creator was calling for a live Zoom meeting with other atheists to discuss a book by Ehrman. The video's creator also explained Ehrman's history, how Ehrman used to be a devout evangelical Episcopalian, but then he went to Princeton to study ancient languages and there learned about the many different translations of the Bible, which led him to question his own faith and turned him away from God. I remember when I heard about this Ehrman, I was very curious and did some research on him. I was curious because his story wasn't too different from my own, except that when he went to an Ivy League college and lost his faith. I went to a state university and struggled to hold on to my faith. Now imagine what would have happened if Ehrman had learned what we know to be true. Imagine if he had a teacher like Emery or Barley or you, pointing him to seek the origins of those translations to find the truth. I myself had a similar experience, as previously stated, that in my faith I was tested repeatedly during my college years and even into the years while I struggled to hold on to my faith or to make sense of what I've been taught in so many different churches. One of the things that I learned from a pastor at one church, one thing I learned from a pastor at one church was that there is some truth in a lot of different works from other authors. But it doesn't mean that everything they say is all true. There is only one source that is all truth. This is what I held on to until I heard about the truth of the Bible from you and Pastor Barley. Suddenly I found answers to all those questions professors and students threw at me that I couldn't answer before. If not for the answers I found in America's Promise, I may have ended up just like Bart Ehrman. I truly believe that Bart Ehrman is a man desperately in need of the kingdom message. However, just because there is still much insight into what the Bible says to which Ehrman can be there is still much insight to what Ehrman says about the Bible that can still be a good second witness. I hope that this gives you some thought and keep it in mind when reading the comments of others. Well, I couldn't have put that together any better. So this guy says, yeah, I almost lost my faith too, except he had an opportunity to listen to a kingdom believer. In this case, it was America's Promise. I'm not throwing roses on myself. He's saying I had a crossroads. I doubted my religion. It's only because God's grace. So why is this person that wrote us a kingdom believer and this man is not? It's God that does the choosing. It's God that does the choosing. This man is so close. I'd love to have a conversation with him. Right? Now, that person's testimony is an amazing one indeed. And I know that the crossroads they found themselves in is similar to what you out there already have heard before. Right? Some of them were ready to outright abandon Christianity because of what's being taught out there right now. And most of the time, it's the burning hell doctrine that people take issue with. Most of the time. People that haven't made up their mind or are unsure of God because of doubts they have concerning a false doctrine are at a crossroads, like I said. And sometimes, apparently, all it takes is the gospel of the kingdom to turn them from atheism to the truth. That's why this is an opportunity, right? So continue to study, after all, according to Solomon, it's the honor of kings to search a matter out. It's the glory of God to hide it, right? Proverbs 25, you remember. Now, like I mentioned last week, I do have, and we're in closing, I do want to mention this for my viewers out there. I mentioned last week, I do have the Keys to the Kingdom Bible. It's in my hands now. Okay? And yes, Miss Martha was able to find one, and we've ordered my own, so I don't know how long I have to borrow this one. Okay, and I recently got the handbook to this. So this is the how, why, when, where, and how, everything, how this came to be. This is what I wanted. I want to know the background of this whole thing. So I am getting through it. I'm not going to formally review this for a while. It's going to take me a while, but I do have it in my hands. I also have the Earth-Shattering Truth by the same author, and this is a companion volume to the Aeonian books. Okay, so I'm going to read this one first because it tells me the history of how this Keys to the Kingdom Bible came to be. And me and a few others at the church are currently listening to his YouTube channels, broadcast. That would be Christopher Sparks, his YouTube. We're going through those and hearing him out on everything. Okay, so far so good. So far so good. All right, so interesting though, I wanted to show this to you. If you go to the bibliography of this, I always check bibliographies first. If you go to a bibliography on this Keys to the Kingdom Bible, you might be surprised, and this is interesting. It'd be Appendix 5, Select Bibliography. Let's see, it's got a whole lot of authors. Benson, Reed, the Anglo-Israel Thesis. Recognize that one? Capt, E. Ehrman. What happened to the 12 tribes of Israel? What's that doing in there? Josephus. I know that one. Jowett, G.F. The Drama of the Lost Disciples. In the bibliography now, the companion is even better. Let me look at this bibliography. I'll just find some that you may or may not know. Again, Reed Benson, Anglo-Israel Thesis. I don't agree with Reed Benson on 100% across the board, but if you are going to read something from him, Anglo-Israel Thesis is an excellent read. E. Raymond Capp, Stonehenge and Druidism. E. Raymond Capp, Lost Chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. E. Raymond Capp, The Traditions of Glastonbury. E. Raymond Capp, What Happened to the Lost 12 Tribes of Israel. Bibliographies. Anything else? Again, Alexander Hislop, The Two Babylons. Josephus, George Jowett again, The Drama of the Lost Disciples. Werner Kelly, The Bible is History. All right, some of these you might recognize. And then, of course, it goes all the way through, and there's a lot of concordances. But what I'm saying is I was very surprised to find our very own E. Raymond Capp listed, our very own Reed Benson, kingdom sources listed in the bibliography. So I don't know what's going on. I want to get to the bottom of it. It's fairly exciting, right? So I'm going to figure that out. I was surprised. I showed that to everyone. So, and over the last week's or so sermon, I have been astounded by the amount. Over the last month, actually, the sermons, we've gotten an enormous amount of emails and letters concerning these last couple of sermons about Bible and textual criticism, origins. And I do thank you for your support. And I promise to keep up my studies so that you and I can keep learning together. All right? And one last thing. We have talked to the company in town. We may get better internet service this year sometime, hopefully soon, which means that we would be gearing up for live Sunday sermons. So I just want to let you guys out there on YouTube know that it is something I'm aware of, and it's been requested heavily over the last year. And it seems like that would be more of a reality this year because broadband service is available to the church. So I just want to let you guys know that, and I will keep you out there posted about that and how it affects our broadcasts and things like that. We would still do weekly sermons, and they would still be DVDs and CDs. But those of you who like to tune into live sermons of the sermon, live video feed of the sermon, it looks like that's more of a reality this year than anywhere else.